At the Riverwalk Imperial Hotel in San Antonio, David Harris raised his platinum card with a confident grin. "Tonight, money is no object for my beautiful bride," he announced to the wedding guests gathered around the marble reception desk. "Sir, I'm sorry," the hotel manager said quietly, "but this account shows as frozen by co-owner request." Kayla's champagne smile faltered. "Co-owner? David, you told me your teacher ex-wife signed everything away." That's when David's eyes found Margaret Harris in her simple black dress, standing calmly near the floral arrangements. His former wife of 35 years stepped forward with the slow precision of someone who had finally learned to read her own financial documents. "The co-owner," she said clearly, "is me. If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments where in the world are you listening from?" Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now, let's get started. The winter morning sun cuts through the kitchen blinds of the small one-story house on Maple Street, casting thin lines of light across the scratched Formica table. Margaret Harris sits in the vinyl chair she has occupied for breakfast for the past 15 years, but today the familiar ritual feels different. Her hands, marked with age spots and the gentle tremor of arthritis, smooth out 3 pieces of paper like a dealer, arranging cards for a game she never learned to play. The Social Security benefit letter lies open first, its government seal already broken by her careful thumb. The numbers swim slightly in the morning light, smaller than last month's statement, with a line marked, "Garnishment Withholding," that glows like a fresh wound. Next it, her teacher pension statement from the district shows the same steady decline she has been trying not to notice for months. The medical bills from Medicare sit in a neat stack, still in their torn envelopes, each one a reminder that growing old costs more than she saved for. The old heater in the hallway coughs once, then settles into its familiar wheeze. Maggie reaches for her coffee mug, the one with the faded, "World's Best Teacher" print that David bought her 20 years ago. The ceramic feels warm against her palm, but the coffee has gone cold while she stared at the numbers. "I tell myself I'm just a retired woman overthinking numbers I don't understand," she whispers to the empty kitchen. Her voice sounds thinner than she remembers, swallowed by the silence that has filled the house since David moved out 3 months ago. The refrigerator hums behind her, a steady sound that used to be background noise when David's morning news played on the small television. Now it sounds loud, almost accusing. She picks up the pension statement again, tracing the line with her finger where her retirement account balance should be. The transfer note from 2 years ago sits there in plain black ink, Harris Development LLC Capital Contribution. She remembers signing the paperwork at the same table. David explaining it was just a tax thing, honey, while she worried about the dinner getting cold on the stove. Through the kitchen window, she can see Mrs. Chen from next door hanging laundry on the line, moving with the careful precision of someone whose back aches every morning. The sight makes Maggie straighten in her chair, rolling her shoulders to ease the stiffness that seems to settle deeper each day. She used to hang laundry too, before David installed the dryer, back when they still talked about plans and budgets together. The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway makes her look up. Her heart jumps slightly, the way it has since the divorce papers were signed. Always half expecting David to return with an explanation that makes everything make sense again. But the footsteps approaching her front door are lighter, quicker than his familiar heavy stride. The doorbell rings once, sharp and official. Maggie rises from the table slowly, her knees protesting as they always do in the morning cold. She smooths down her old cardigan, the blue one, with the tiny pills of fabric that no amount of washing can remove, and walks to the front door with measured steps. Through the peephole, she sees a young man in a black suit that looks expensive against the backdrop of her faded plastic lawn chairs. He holds something in his hands, a cream-colored envelope that catches the light like jewelry. His cologne reaches her even through the closed door, sharp and modern, nothing like the aftershave David used to splash on before work. "Ms. Harris?" he asks when she opens the door, his smile wide and practiced. "Ex-Mrs. David Harris?" The words land like small stones thrown at glass, each one precise and designed to crack something she thought was already broken. She nods, not trusting her voice yet, and he extends the envelope toward her with both hands, as if presenting an award. The paper feels heavy, substantial, weighted with more than just cardstock and ink. The gold foil seal catches the sun as she turns it over. And she recognizes the elegant script immediately, David's handwriting on the address label, but not his usual careless scrawl. This is the careful penmanship he used for important clients. "What is this?" she asks, though part of her already knows from the weight of the envelope, the formality of the delivery. "Wedding invitation," the young man says, his smile never wavering. "Mr. Harris wanted to make sure you received it personally. He said you were special." The word, special, comes out like honey over broken glass, sweet and dangerous. Maggie waits until his car disappears down the street before she closes the door and leans against it. The envelope sits in her hands like evidence of something she cannot yet name. She carries it back to the kitchen table, setting it down next to the pension statements and medical bills, and stares at it for a long moment. The invitation opens like a small book, revealing thick cream paper and gold lettering that must have cost more than her monthly grocery budget. "David Harris and Kayla Rivera request your presence at their wedding celebration," the script reads, "Saturday evening at the Riverwalk. Imperial Hotel, Grand Ballroom reserved, black tie reception to follow." Maggie's breath catches. The Riverwalk Imperial is the hotel they drove past on special occasions. The one David always called too expensive for people like us, when she suggested they try the Christmas jazz brunch just once. She remembers pressing her face to the passenger window as a younger woman, watching elegant couples step out of taxis under the golden lights of the entrance. The invitation includes a photograph of David and Kayla, his arm around a woman who looks barely older than their youngest daughter. Kayla's smile is bright and confident, her hand positioned to show off a diamond ring that catches the photographer's flash like a small star. David looks younger somehow, his hair freshly cut, his suit clearly tailored. He looks like the successful businessman he always wanted to be. At the bottom of the invitation, a small line reads, "The bride and groom are grateful for the presence of family and oldest friends as they begin their new life together." The words, "oldest friends," seem to glow on the page, and Maggie realizes that nowhere in the elegant script does it say, "former wife," or acknowledge the 35 years she spent building the foundation of the life David is now celebrating. She sets the invitation down and walks to the window, looking out at the small backyard where David once promised to build a deck for their retirement. The space is empty except for her clothesline and a rusty lawn chair that wobbles when the wind picks up. The contrast between the promise and the reality makes her throat tight. Back at the table, she opens her pill organizer, the plastic compartments marked with the days of the week in large letters. Tuesday's pills rattle softly as she shakes them into her palm, the blood pressure medication. The arthritis pills, the vitamin D supplement the doctor said might help with the fatigue. Each pill represents a doctor's visit, a copay, a line item on the medical bills that seem to grow thicker each month. She props the invitation against her pill organizer like a greeting card, and the contrast strikes her immediately. The elegant couple in the photograph, surrounded by the promise of grand ballrooms and open bars, sits next to the weekly reminder of her body's slow rebellion and the careful rationing required to afford basic health care. "He's paying for this somehow," she says aloud, her voice steadier now in the quiet kitchen. "And part of that money used to be mine." The thought brings with it a strange clarity, as if someone has adjusted the focus on a camera lens. The numbers on her pension statement suddenly look different, not like bureaucratic confusion but like deliberate redirection. The medical bills feel heavier, not just because of her health but because of the wealth that should have helped bear their weight. She pulls out the manila folder labeled, "Important," that sits in the kitchen drawer next to the takeout menus and expired coupons. Inside are copies of documents she signed without reading carefully enough, the divorce decree. With its vague language about assets to be divided pursuant to separate agreement, the business partnership papers David brought home one evening with Chinese food. The refinancing documents that promised to simplify their financial situation. As the afternoon light begins to fade, Maggie spreads these papers around the invitation like pieces of a puzzle she is only now beginning to see. The heater kicks on again, filling the silence with its mechanical comfort. And she sits in the growing shadows, reading her own signature over and over until it starts to look like someone else's name. The invitation catches the last light from the window, and the gold script seems to pulse with its own illumination. David wanted her to come to this wedding, wanted her to see his success displayed in crystal and champagne. Wanted her to witness the life he built after walking away from their shared foundation. "If he wants me there so badly," Maggie murmurs to the empty kitchen, her voice carrying a note of steel she has not heard from herself in years, "I'll go." But not as the poor, dumped ex-wife he remembers. She folds the invitation carefully and slides it into the manila folder with the pension statements and medical bills. Her hands shake slightly, but her voice is steady as she speaks to the growing darkness outside her window. "If you're going to use my money to buy her a fairy tale," she says, "then you're going to explain it to both of us." The kitchen settles into evening quiet, but for the first time in months, the silence feels less like abandonment and more like the pause before a door opens. The invitation sits in the folder like a challenge, and Maggie feels something she thought was buried with the divorce papers beginning to stir the teacher. Who never let a student get away with copying someone else's work, the wife who balanced budgets and asked hard questions. The woman who signed her name because she believed in partnership, not because she agreed to be erased. Outside, the streetlights begin to flicker on, casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. Where she and David used to take evening walks, planning their retirement and imagining the years ahead. Those plans are gone now, replaced by his champagne toasts and her pill organizers, but her signature is still on the documents that made his new life possible. The thought follows her as she turns off the kitchen light and makes her way to bed, the invitation safely filed away. But its presence filling the small house like the scent of something burning just out of sight. The morning after the invitation arrives, Maggie wakes to the sound of garbage trucks rumbling down Maple Street. She lies in bed for a moment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that David always promised to fix. Listening to her neighbors drag their bins to the curb. The routine sounds feel different now, like a life she is watching from outside rather than living within. Her knees protest as she swings her legs over the side of the bed, joints stiff from the cold front that moved through San Antonio overnight. The hardwood floor feels like ice against her bare feet, and she reaches for the threadbare robe hanging on the bedpost. In the bathroom mirror, her reflection looks older than she feels inside. Gray hair flattened on one side, lines deeper around her eyes than they were before the divorce. She makes coffee in the small pot David left behind, measuring out the grounds with the careful precision of someone who knows exactly how much everything costs. While it brews, she sits at the kitchen table with the manila folder, spreading out the documents in the thin morning light. The invitation sits at the center like a bright accusation, surrounded by the papers that should explain her financial life, but instead read like a foreign language. The Social Security statement shows the garnishment line again, a steady deduction she never authorized and cannot understand. Her teacher pension account summary includes a phone number printed in small letters at the bottom, and Maggie stares at it while she drinks her coffee, gathering the courage to ask questions she should have asked 2 years ago. At 9 o'clock, she dials the number and waits through the automated menu, pressing buttons for retirement accounts, then pension inquiries, then finally reaching a human voice. The woman on the phone sounds young and cheerful, asking for Maggie's social security number and date of birth with the casual efficiency of someone who handles retirement crises every day. "I need to understand a transfer that happened to my account," Maggie says, holding the statement close to her face so she can read the small print. "It shows money going to Harris Development LLC, but I don't remember agreeing to that." The customer service representative puts her on hold, and Maggie listens to soft jazz while she stares out the kitchen window at Mrs. Chen hanging laundry again. The careful routine of clips and clothespins looks like a meditation, each movement deliberate and peaceful. Maggie used to hang laundry too, before David convinced her the dryer was more efficient. "Mrs. Harris?" The voice returns, slightly less cheerful now. "I see the transfer you're referring to. It shows both account holders' signatures on the authorization form. The funds were moved to a business investment vehicle as part of a capital contribution agreement." "Both account holders," Maggie repeats slowly. "But I'm the only one who earned that pension. I worked 30 years in the school district." There is a pause, the sound of typing. "Yes, ma'am, but the account was set up as joint with spousal access when you married Mr. Harris." The transfer was technically authorized, though I understand it might feel confusing. Confusing. The word sits in Maggie's chest like a stone. She thanks the representative and hangs up, then stares at the phone for a long moment, wondering when her life became something that needed to be authorized by someone else's signature. She decides to visit the credit union in person, the small branch downtown where she has banked since her first teaching job. The bus ride takes 40 minutes, winding through neighborhoods that show the economic geography of San Antonio. Her modest area giving way to office complexes, then the gleaming towers of downtown where David now works. The credit union lobby smells of coffee and disinfectant, filled with the hushed conversations of people conducting the serious business of their financial lives. Maggie takes a number and sits in a gray plastic chair, watching other customers, mostly seniors like herself, clutch folders of statements and bills. Their faces wear the same expression she recognizes from her own mirror. The carefully controlled worry of people trying to make sense of numbers they cannot change. When her number is called, she meets with Tanya, a young woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a cardigan similar to Maggie's, though clearly newer and more expensive. Tanya's desk is organized with the precision of someone who understands that other people's financial mistakes can destroy lives. And she listens carefully as Maggie explains about the pension transfer and the wedding invitation. "Let me pull up your full account history," Tanya says, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Sometimes these business arrangements are more complicated than they appear on single statements. The computer screen fills with numbers and dates, and Tanya's expression grows more serious as she scrolls. She prints several pages and spreads them on the desk like evidence, pointing to highlighted lines with her pen. "Mrs. Harris, you were listed as a partner and guarantor on several business accounts," she says gently. "The Harris Development Company has 3 business credit lines and a premium rewards card tied to both your names. Did you know about these?" Maggie stares at the printouts, seeing her name repeated beside David's in official bank fonts. She remembers signing papers at their kitchen table, David explaining that it was standard procedure for married couples, and that her steady teaching income would help with qualification. She thought she was signing to support their shared dreams, not to become invisible collateral for his solo ambitions. "The divorce decree should have addressed the division of these business assets," Tanya continues. "But I don't see any notation about account closures or responsibility transfers. In Texas, both parties typically remain liable unless there's specific legal action to separate the obligations." The words wash over Maggie like cold water. She thinks of David at the Riverwalk Imperial, ordering champagne and promising Kayla the most expensive wedding San Antonio has ever seen, using credit lines built on Maggie's teacher salary and retirement contributions. Her careful budgeting and skipped vacations transformed into uplighting and open bars for people who barely know her name. On the bus ride home, Maggie sits near the back, watching the city scroll past through scratched windows. A Harris Development billboard rises beside the highway, showing David in a perfectly tailored suit, arm around a smiling family, the slogan reading, "Your dream home, handled like family." The irony tastes bitter in her mouth. Family handled like strangers, and strangers handled like family, as long as they have enough credit to qualify. She stops at the small grocery store near her neighborhood, the one where she shops with coupons and calculates prices per ounce out of habit. In the checkout line, she overhears 2 women talking about their upcoming retirement cruises, comparing cabin prices and excursion packages with the casual confidence of people who trust their pensions will be there when they need them. Back home, she empties a shoebox of mail onto the living room floor, documents she has been putting off reading because they looked too official and complicated. Among the Medicare explanations of benefits and AARP magazines, she finds envelopes from law firms, insurance companies, and financial institutions, all the machinery of adult life that keeps running whether you understand it or not. One envelope, thin and formal, contains a copy of something called a joint business card agreement, dated 3 years ago. Her signature appears beside David's, neat and trusting, on an application for what the fine print describes as a Platinum Reserve Credit Facility with Premium Rewards Program. She has no memory of signing it, but the pen strokes are unmistakably hers. The late afternoon sun slants through the living room windows, creating patches of light and shadow on the scattered papers. Maggie sits on the edge of her worn sofa, organizing documents by date and trying to piece together the timeline of her financial disappearance. Each signature, each authorization, each spousal consent form shows her agreeing to arrangements she never fully understood. As evening approaches, she makes a simple dinner of soup and crackers, eating at the kitchen table. While she reads through a Medicare statement that shows charges for medical equipment she never received. The bureaucratic language is dense and confusing, but the pattern is becoming clear. Her name appears on documents that benefit David's business, while her own needs get smaller attention and fewer resources. The house grows quiet around her as darkness settles outside. She sits in the pool of light from the kitchen lamp, surrounded by evidence of a financial life that was never quite her own, even when she was the one earning the money and signing the papers. The invitation to David's wedding sits at the center of it all. Elegant and expensive, a celebration funded by the careful savings of a woman who ate soup for dinner while her ex-husband ordered champagne. She thinks about the Riverwalk Imperial, about David's promise to Kayla. Of no limits, about the premium credit card that bears both their names but only serves his dreams. For the first time, she calculates not just the cost of the wedding, but its source: her pension contributions, her credit history. Her signature on documents she trusted him to explain. If he's using the card I helped build, she whispers to the empty kitchen, he's not just marrying her with his money. He's doing it with my retirement. The realization settles in her chest like a weight she has been carrying without knowing it. Tomorrow, she decides, she will make phone calls to lawyers and banks. And anyone who might help her understand exactly how much of her future David has already spent on his present. The invitation gleams under the kitchen light, no longer just a social obligation but evidence of theft dressed up as celebration. She turns off the lights and makes her way to bed, leaving the documents organized on the table like a case she is building against her own past naivety. In the darkness of her bedroom, she listens to the familiar sounds of the house settling around her, but for the first time in months. The silence feels less like loneliness and more like the quiet before important work begins. The wedding is in 2 weeks. She has that long to figure out exactly how much of it she has already paid for, and what she might be able to do about it. The thought follows her into sleep, not as anxiety but as purpose. The teacher in her recognizing a problem that requires careful research and a solution that will not find itself. Outside her window, San Antonio spreads out in a grid of streetlights and sleeping houses, full of people whose marriages and divorces and financial arrangements intersect in ways they may never fully understand. But Maggie is beginning to understand hers, one document at a time, one signature at a time, one stolen dollar at a time. And understanding, she has learned from 30 years of teaching, is the first step toward justice. A week before David's wedding, Maggie sits in the fellowship hall of First Baptist Church. The invitation spread on the folding table between her coffee cup and a plate of store-bought cookies. The Wednesday evening Bible study group has thinned since fall. Some members moved to assisted living, others simply stopped coming as winter made the drive more difficult, but the remaining dozen women form a tight circle of shared experience and mutual support. Loretta Washington, her closest friend in the group, examines the gold-embossed invitation with the careful attention of a detective studying evidence. At 71, Loretta has survived 2 husbands and a bankruptcy, and her experience with men and money runs deeper than most textbooks on either subject. She holds the invitation up to the fluorescent light as if checking for watermarks. "Girl," Loretta says, her voice carrying the authority of someone who has seen every variation of human foolishness, he wrote, "Special guest." After 35 years as his wife? She sets the invitation down with the decisive snap of someone delivering a verdict. That man has lost what little sense the Lord gave him. The other women lean in, murmuring agreement and indignation in equal measure. Betty Morrison, whose own divorce happened when she was 68, shakes her head slowly. "At least my ex-husband had the decency to move to Dallas," she says. "This is like being invited to watch him spend your grocery money on someone else's birthday party." Maggie feels heat rise in her cheeks, partly from embarrassment and partly from an anger she is still learning to recognize. The invitation that seemed elegant in her kitchen looks different under the harsh church lighting. Surrounded by women who understand the specific humiliation of being erased from your own life story while being asked to applaud the rewrite. Look at this, Loretta continues, pointing to the fine print at the bottom of the invitation. No mention of your years together, no acknowledgement of what you built. Just, David and Kayla request your presence, like you're some distant cousin who might send a nice gift. The fellowship hall smells of coffee that has been sitting too long and the pine-scented cleaner the church uses to mop the linoleum floors. On the wall, a banner reads, "Faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love." And Maggie wonders what love looks like when it comes with legal documents and credit card statements that nobody bothers to explain. Sarah Chen, the youngest woman in the group at 59, holds up her phone. "I looked up this hotel online," she says, scrolling through pictures of crystal chandeliers and marble floors. "The cheapest wedding package starts at $50,000. The premium ballroom they reserved? That's 6 figures, easy." The numbers hit the table like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of shocked silence. Maggie thinks of her own wedding 36 years ago, held in this same fellowship hall with decorations from the church craft closet and a cake baked by David's mother. It cost less than $300 total, and she wore a dress from JCPenney. That she altered herself because they were saving money for the down payment on their first house. "Margaret," says Dorothy Williams, the group's unofficial treasurer who manages the church's senior assistance fund, "do you know where he's getting the money for all this?" Her question carries the weight of someone who has seen too many elderly people discover their savings have been borrowed, invested, or otherwise redirected by family members who promised to take care of everything. Maggie pulls out the manila folder she has been carrying everywhere since her visit to the credit union. The papers inside seem to multiply each day as she discovers new accounts, new agreements, new ways her signature has been used to build David's financial foundation. She spreads out the joint credit applications, the pension transfer authorizations, the business partnership documents that she signed without reading carefully enough. "He used my teacher's pension to start his company," she says, the words feeling strange in her mouth, like speaking a foreign language she is just learning. "And I'm still on the business credit cards that he's using to pay for all this." She gestures at the invitation, then at the photos on Sarah's phone showing ice sculptures and 7-course dinner menus. The silence in the fellowship hall shifts from sympathetic to outraged. These women have lived through decades of economic ups and downs, raised families on tight budgets, and learned to stretch dollars until they screamed. They understand the difference between sharing financial responsibilities in a marriage and having your life savings redirected without your knowledge or consent. "Honey," Loretta says, her voice gentle but firm, "that's not just inconsiderate. That's theft dressed up in a tuxedo." The word, theft, hangs in the air among the coffee cups and church bulletins, too harsh for the polite setting but too accurate to dismiss. Maggie feels something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot she has been carrying since the divorce papers were signed. She has been calling it betrayal, disappointment, or the painful end of a marriage, but Loretta's plain speaking opens up a different vocabulary entirely. After the Bible study ends and the other women have gathered their purses and car keys, Loretta walks Maggie to her car in the church parking lot. The February evening is crisp, and the streetlights cast long shadows between the parked vehicles. Maggie's hands shake slightly as she fumbles with her keys, and Loretta notices. "You thinking about going to this wedding?" Loretta asks. Maggie nods. "I keep thinking I should stay home, watch television, and let everyone assume I'm just fading away quietly like a good ex-wife should." She looks up at her friend, seeing her own confusion reflected in Loretta's concerned expression. "But then I think about that hotel bill, about him toasting his new life with my retirement money, and something inside me says no." Loretta nods slowly. "Good. That's your backbone talking, and it's about time it spoke up." She puts her hand on Maggie's shoulder with the firm grip of someone offering genuine support. "But if you're going to show up, don't go to watch. Go to collect." The next afternoon, Maggie drives downtown to David's office, a sleek glass building that rose from a vacant lot during the housing boom 15 years ago. The lobby smells of expensive cologne and fresh flowers, with leather furniture arranged around a fountain that burbles softly in the background. She feels out of place in her practical coat and comfortable shoes. But she straightens her spine and walks to the reception desk with the determined stride of someone conducting official business. The receptionist is young and glossy, with perfectly styled hair and a suit that probably costs more than Maggie's monthly grocery budget. She looks up from her computer screen with the practiced smile of someone trained to be polite to clients and dismissive of everyone else. "I'd like to speak with David Harris," Maggie says. The receptionist's smile tightens almost imperceptibly as she takes in Maggie's appearance. "Do you have an appointment?" "Mr. Harris is very busy with end-of-quarter preparations. I'm his former wife," Maggie says, the phrase still feeling awkward in her mouth. "Margaret Harris. It's about a financial matter." The young woman's expression shifts from polite dismissal to something approaching alarm. She picks up the phone and speaks in a voice too low for Maggie to hear, then hangs up and slides a business card across the marble counter. "Mr. Harris asked that all personal matters be handled through his attorney now," she says, her tone carefully neutral. "Mr. Peterson can answer any questions you might have about the divorce settlement or other arrangements." Maggie takes the business card, noting that it is expensive cardstock with embossed lettering, the kind of detail that signals serious money to serious people. She turns to leave, then pauses as a familiar laugh echoes from the hallway behind the reception desk. Through the glass doors that separate the lobby from the office space, she can see Kayla Rivera standing with a man in a florist's uniform. Kayla wears a cream-colored dress that fits perfectly, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestures at photographs spread across a conference table. Even from a distance, Maggie can see the images of elaborate floral arrangements, the kind of lush displays that turn wedding venues into temporary palaces. "No, Kayla's voice carries clearly through the glass. "David promised me the most beautiful wedding San Antonio has ever seen. He said money is no object because I'm worth more than anything he's had before." She laughs again, a sound like wind chimes that would be pretty if it didn't cut so deeply. The florist points to a simpler arrangement, probably suggesting a more moderate option, but Kayla waves him off. "He specifically said to give me whatever I want," she says. This wedding is his way of showing everyone that he's finally living the life he deserves, with someone who appreciates what he's accomplished. The words land in Maggie's chest like physical blows. She stands frozen in the marble lobby, surrounded by the scent of expensive flowers and the sound of her replacement planning. A celebration funded by 35 years of her careful budgeting and financial sacrifice. She thinks of her arthritic hands sorting pills into weekly dispensers, of choosing generic medications to save $15, of eating soup for dinner. While David promises Kayla that money is no object. She leaves the building without another word, walking through the downtown streets toward the bus stop with careful, measured steps. The afternoon sun feels too bright, reflecting off the glass and steel around her. And she puts on her sunglasses as much to hide her expression as to shield her eyes. On the bus ride home, she sits next to an elderly man reading a newspaper folded to the financial section. The headlines are full of warnings about retirement security and healthcare costs. The ongoing concerns of people whose working years are behind them and whose fixed incomes rarely cover their expanding needs. She thinks about the Medicare co-pays she calculates carefully each month, about the arthritis medication she stretches to last an extra week, about the small economies that add up to the difference between independence and charity. That evening, she spreads the wedding invitation on her kitchen table next to the business credit card applications and pension transfer documents. In the light of her kitchen lamp, the elegant script and gold foil look different, not like a social invitation but like a receipt. A public acknowledgement of how her life savings have been converted into someone else's happiness. She picks up the phone and dials the number on the lawyer's business card the receptionist gave her. The call goes to voicemail, a smooth professional recording that promises a return call within one business day. She leaves her name and number, then adds, "It's about David Harris and the Harris Development Company accounts. I need to understand what I signed and what I'm still responsible for." As she hangs up, she realizes that for the first time in months, her voice sounded steady and clear. The invitation sits before her, no longer a humiliation she has to endure, but evidence of exactly how much her careful savings and honest credit have been converted into other people's celebration. She folds the invitation carefully and places it back in the manila folder with all the other documents that bear her signature. Tomorrow she will begin making the phone calls and asking the questions she should have asked 2 years ago. Tonight, she will sleep in her small house with its leaking roof and second-hand furniture. But she will sleep with the knowledge that she has finally stopped being polite about her own robbery. Outside, San Antonio settles into evening quiet, full of people managing their own financial mysteries and family complications. But inside the small house on Maple Street, a retired teacher sits at her kitchen table, organizing evidence and planning her next move with the systematic patience of someone who has spent decades helping students understand difficult concepts one step at a time. The wedding invitation gleams in the folder, an expensive promise of celebration that will cost far more than the couple realizes. Because some bills come due in courtrooms rather than hotels, and some debts require more than money to settle. The rain starts just after midnight, drumming against the roof of Maggie's house with the persistence of someone demanding to be let in. She lies awake listening to the familiar symphony of an old house in a storm, the gentle ping of water hitting the bucket in the hallway, the whistle of wind through the gap around the back door, the occasional pop of settling wood that David always promised to investigate but never did. By 3 a.m, she gives up on sleep and makes her way to the kitchen, moving carefully in the dark to avoid the bucket that catches the persistent leak. The linoleum floor feels cold against her bare feet, and she realizes she has been putting off buying new slippers. Along with the dozen other small comforts she has been denying herself since the divorce. She makes coffee in the dark, not wanting to turn on the harsh overhead light that would make the kitchen look as tired as she feels. The soft glow from the streetlight outside provides just enough illumination to navigate the familiar space, casting everything in shades of gray that match her mood. The manila folder sits on the table where she left it, surrounded by the evidence of her financial disappearance. In the pre-dawn quiet, with rain pattering against the windows, she spreads out the documents again, this time organizing them not by date but by the level of betrayal they represent. The joint credit card applications go in one pile, the business partnership agreements in another, and the pension transfer authorizations, the ones that moved her retirement savings into David's company, in a third pile that makes her stomach tighten just to look at. She picks up the phone and dials the number on the property tax bill, even though she knows the county office won't open for hours. She just wants to hear the recorded message again, to confirm what the clerk told her yesterday, that David never completed the paperwork to remove her from the home equity line of credit he opened for Harris Development. If his business fails, if he defaults on his loans, they can still come after her small house, the only security she has left. The automated message plays in the dark kitchen, explaining office hours and department extensions with the cheerful efficiency of a system that does not care about anyone's emergency. She hangs up and stares at the rain streaming down the window, thinking about foreclosure notices and eviction papers and all the ways a person can lose their home without ever agreeing to put it at risk. Her arthritis flares in the cold, making her hands ache as she tries to massage the stiffness from her knuckles. The pain medication sits in her pill organizer, but she has been rationing it to make the prescription last until her Medicare coverage kicks in for the next month. Every decision in her life now requires this kind of calculation: medicine versus groceries, heat versus electricity, dignity versus the practical necessities of surviving on a fixed income that keeps getting smaller. She pulls the file box from under her bed, the cardboard container where she keeps the important papers that David never bothered to explain properly. The box smells of dust and old paper, and she sneezes as she carries it to the kitchen table under the weak light. Inside, beneath the birth certificates and insurance policies, she finds envelopes from Lone Star Bank's Elite Services Department, mail she remembers receiving but never opening, because the fancy letterhead seemed to be meant for someone else. The first envelope contains a welcome packet for something called the Harris Development Platinum Reserve Card, a credit facility with a limit that makes her catch her breath. The application paperwork shows both their names, her signature next to David's, authorizing what the fine print describes as unlimited revolving credit for qualified business and personal expenses. She has no memory of signing this particular document, though the handwriting is unmistakably hers. It must have been one of the many papers David brought home during their final years together. Mixed in with tax forms and insurance updates, presented as routine paperwork that required her signature for legal purposes. She remembers trusting him to explain what she was signing, assuming that 35 years of marriage had earned her the right to trust his judgment about their shared financial life. The second envelope contains monthly statements going back 2 years, showing charges that paint a picture of David's new lifestyle. Expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Austin and Houston, jewelry purchases that coincide with the months when he was seeing Kayla but still living at home. Each statement shows her name as co-owner and guarantor, legally responsible for debts she never knew were being incurred in her name. She calculates the total in her head, adding up the dinner bills and hotel charges and shopping sprees that David funded with credit built on her teacher's salary and retirement contributions. The number is larger than her annual pension, larger than the equity in her small house, larger than anything she could pay back. Even if she lived to be 100 and spent nothing on herself but the most basic necessities. The rain grows heavier, and she has to move the bucket in the hallway as the leak spreads to a new spot in the ceiling. The sound of water hitting plastic echoes through the small house. A rhythmic reminder of all the maintenance and repairs that have been deferred because there is never quite enough money to fix everything that needs attention. Back in the kitchen, she opens the last envelope and finds a letter from the bank's legal department, dated just 2 weeks ago, explaining that the account is being reviewed for unusual activity patterns and requesting documentation of business expenses charged to personal credit facilities. The letter is addressed to both her and David, but it was sent only to her address, suggesting that David may have changed his mailing address without updating this particular account. She sits in her threadbare robe at the kitchen table, surrounded by evidence of a financial life she never fully understood or consented to, listening to rain fall on a house that may not be hers much longer. For the first time since the divorce, she allows herself to feel the full weight of what has happened, not just the end of a marriage, but the systematic conversion of her life's work into someone else's freedom. The streetlight flickers outside, creating shadows that dance across the walls of the kitchen, where she has eaten breakfast alone for 3 months, where she counts out pills and calculates grocery budgets and tries to make sense of numbers that seem designed to confuse rather than clarify. She thinks about David sleeping in his downtown apartment, probably not worrying about leaks or heating bills or whether his Medicare coverage will approve his next doctor's visit. At 5 in the morning, as the rain finally begins to ease, she makes a phone call to the lawyer whose business card the receptionist gave her yesterday. The call goes to voicemail again, but this time her message is longer and more specific. "This is Margaret Harris," she says into the recording, her voice steady in the pre-dawn quiet. "I need to understand my legal responsibilities for debts incurred by Harris Development and David Harris. I've discovered credit accounts I didn't know about, business partnerships I don't remember agreeing to, and transfers from my retirement that I was told were temporary tax arrangements. I need to know what I signed and what I can do about it." She hangs up and sits in the growing light, watching the sun rise through the kitchen window over a neighborhood of small houses, where other people are beginning their own days of careful calculations and modest hopes. The rain has stopped, but the bucket in the hallway continues to catch the occasional drop from the damaged ceiling, each ping a small reminder that some problems cannot be ignored indefinitely. By 7 o'clock, she has organized all the documents into clear categories and written a list of questions that she will ask the lawyer when he returns her call. For the first time in months, she feels like a teacher again, someone capable of research and analysis. Someone who can break down complex problems into manageable parts and work toward solutions with patience and determination. She makes a real breakfast instead of just coffee and toast, scrambling eggs and making fresh orange juice, eating at the table, while she reviews her list and prepares for the conversations that will determine whether she spends her remaining years in poverty, or with some measure of the security she spent 30 years building. The wedding invitation sits in the folder with all the other documents, no longer just an insult but evidence in a case she is finally ready to build. David wanted her to come to his celebration, to witness his success and his happiness with someone young and beautiful. But he may discover that some guests arrive with more than congratulations, and some celebrations cost more than the people throwing them ever intended to pay. Outside, San Antonio wakes up to a world washed clean by overnight rain, full of people beginning another day of work and worry and hope. Inside the small house on Maple Street, a retired teacher sits at her kitchen table with a folder full of documents and a growing sense that her story is not over yet. That the final chapters may be written in courtrooms and bank offices rather than at lonely dinner tables. And that sometimes the most important lessons come not from textbooks but from learning to read the fine print of your own life. The sun rises slowly over San Antonio, painting the kitchen walls with soft gold light that makes even the worn Formica table look warm and welcoming. Maggie sits with her second cup of coffee, watching the light move across the documents spread before her, and finds herself remembering the first time David brought home official papers for her to sign. It was 15 years ago, a Tuesday evening in late spring when the mortgage rates were climbing. And David had heard about a business opportunity from someone at the Rotary Club. She was grading spelling tests at the same table, red pen in hand. When he walked in with a folder from First National Bank and an excitement in his voice that she hadn't heard since their early married years. "Maggie, honey," he had said, setting the folder down beside her students' papers. "Remember how we always talked about building something together? This is our chance." He explained about the vacant lot on the south side, about the growing demand for affordable housing, about how her steady teaching job and good credit could help him qualify for the construction loan he needed to start his own company. She remembers the way he sat beside her at the table, pointing to the signature lines with the enthusiasm of someone sharing good news. "It's just a formality," he had said when she hesitated over the complex legal language. "The bank requires both spouses to sign, but I'll handle all the business details. You just keep teaching and being wonderful, and we'll build our future together." The memory feels different now, viewed through the lens of what she knows about bank accounts and business partnerships. And the difference between supporting someone's dreams and signing away your security without realizing it. She had trusted him because marriage was supposed to mean trust. Because 35 years together had earned him the right to handle the complicated financial arrangements while she focused on the classroom and the students who needed her attention. Another memory surfaces, this one more recent David standing in their bedroom 2 years ago, holding a thick envelope from the pension administration office and explaining about tax advantages and investment opportunities. "It's just moving money from one account to another," he had said, "but it'll save us thousands in taxes and help the business grow." The advisor said it's what smart couples do. She had signed those papers too, trusting his explanation, believing that us, and we, and our future meant the same thing to both of them. Now she understands that David had been using those pronouns differently, that our future had become his future somewhere along the way. Probably around the time he started working late with Kayla and talking about how marriage should make people happy, not just secure. The phone rings, interrupting her memories, and she recognizes the number from the lawyer's business card. Her heart speeds up slightly as she answers, trying to sound more confident than she feels. "Mrs. Harris? This is James Peterson, returning your call about the Harris development accounts." His voice is professional but not unkind, the tone of someone who deals with financial complications for a living. "I understand you have some questions about business arrangements with your former husband." Maggie takes a breath and explains about the credit cards she didn't know about, the pension transfer she thought was temporary, the wedding invitation that made her realize how much of David's new life she has been unknowingly funding. Mr. Peterson listens without interrupting, occasionally making notes that she can hear through the phone. "Mrs. Harris," he says when she finishes, "I think we need to meet in person to review these documents. What you're describing sounds like it might require legal action to resolve properly. Are you available this afternoon?" 3 hours later, Maggie sits in Mr. Peterson's office, a calm space with law books lining the walls and family photos on the desk, suggesting children and grandchildren who smile for cameras at graduations and birthday parties. He is older than she expected, perhaps 65 himself, with gray hair and reading glasses that he adjusts as he examines the documents she has brought. "The pension transfer is particularly concerning," he says after studying the paperwork for several minutes. In Texas, retirement accounts are generally separate property. But if funds were moved into a marital business or used for community purposes, that changes the legal situation significantly. He looks up at her over his glasses. Did you understand that you were making a permanent contribution to his company? Maggie shakes her head. He said it was temporary, for tax purposes. I thought it would come back to my account after the business got established. Mr. Peterson makes notes on a yellow legal pad, his pen moving with the efficiency of someone who has seen similar situations before. And these credit accounts, you had no knowledge that charges were being made for personal expenses, hotels, restaurants, jewelry? None, Maggie says. I thought the business cards were for construction supplies, equipment, things related to the company. I never imagined he was using them for. She gestures toward the wedding invitation, which sits on his desk like evidence in a criminal case. Mrs. Harris, Mr. Peterson says, setting down his pen and looking at her directly, what you've described constitutes a potential breach of fiduciary duty. In Texas, spouses have certain legal obligations to each other regarding financial decisions, especially those involving separate property like retirement accounts. If your ex-husband used your pension contributions to build a business and then excluded you from the ownership when you divorced, that's legally problematic. The words hang in the air of the quiet office, and Maggie feels something shift inside her. Chest, not hope, exactly, but the possibility that her signatures and her trust might not have been legally meaningless after all. What does that mean, practically? She asks. It means we can file a motion to reopen the divorce decree on the grounds that marital property was not properly identified and divided, he explains. If the business was built with your retirement funds and your credit, you may be entitled to compensation or ownership stake, regardless of what the original decree says about separate agreements. They spend another hour going through the documents, with Mr. Peterson explaining the difference between community property and separate property in Texas law, the legal requirements for informed consent in financial decisions, and the remedies available when one spouse has been financially harmed by the other's actions during marriage or divorce. When Maggie leaves his office, she carries a retainer agreement and a timeline for legal action that could potentially recover some of her losses and protect her from future liability for David's business debts. The sun is setting over downtown San Antonio, casting long shadows between the office buildings where David works and the courthouse where her case might eventually be heard. On the bus ride home, she sits next to a young mother struggling to keep two small children entertained during the long ride to their neighborhood. The woman looks tired in the way that comes from too much responsibility and not enough resources. Counting the change in her purse to make sure she has exact fare. Maggie remembers being that young mother, calculating grocery budgets and worrying about school clothes and trusting David to handle the grown-up financial decisions, because she was too busy managing everything else. Back home, she makes a simple dinner and sits at the table with the legal documents Mr. Peterson has given her. The language is complex, but the basic concepts are clear. She has rights that were not protected during the divorce, assets that were not properly valued, and legal remedies that might restore some measure of justice to a situation that has left her impoverished while David celebrates his prosperity. As darkness settles around the small house, she writes in a notebook the questions she will ask the bank tomorrow, the documents she will request, and the timeline Mr. Peterson has outlined for challenging the divorce decree. For the first time in months, she feels like a student. Again, someone learning new information that might change everything, someone preparing for a test that actually matters. The wedding invitation sits in the manila folder with all the other evidence, no longer just an insult, but the first piece in a puzzle she is finally beginning to solve. David wanted her to come to his wedding, to witness his success and happiness. But he may discover that some witnesses come prepared to testify, and some celebrations reveal more about the celebrants than they intended to show. Outside her window, San Antonio settles into evening routines, full of people managing their own complicated relationships with money and marriage, and the gap between what they were promised and what they received. But inside the small house on Maple Street, a retired teacher sits with law books and legal documents, learning new vocabulary and preparing for a different kind of Lesson 1, where she gets to ask the questions and demand accurate answers, where the final grade depends on truth rather than trust, and where her signature finally means something more than agreeing to let someone else decide her future. The house grows quiet around her as she studies, but the silence feels different now, not lonely but focused, not empty but full of possibility. Tomorrow she will begin the process of reclaiming what was taken from her, not through anger or revenge, but through the careful application of laws designed to protect people who sign documents in good faith and trust the people they love to honor the spirit as well as the letter of their agreements. 2 days before David's wedding, the Travis County Family Court building rises from downtown Austin, like a granite monument to the complications of human relationships. Maggie sits in the passenger seat of Mr. Peterson's Honda Civic, watching lawyers in dark suits hurry up the courthouse steps with briefcases and the determined expressions of people who solve problems for a living. The emergency hearing motion they filed yesterday has been granted for this morning, thanks to what Mr. Peterson calls compelling evidence of undisclosed marital assets and potential fraud. The legal language sounds serious and official, but Maggie still feels like she is about to take a test she did not study for, in a subject she never learned. Remember, Mr. Peterson says as he parks in the attorney's section of the garage, we're not trying to stop the wedding. We're simply asking the court to freeze certain assets pending a proper review of the divorce decree and property division. David's attorney will likely argue that everything was handled properly the first time, but these bank records tell a different story. The family court waiting area smells of coffee and stress, filled with people clutching folders of documents and wearing the careful expressions of individuals whose personal lives have become legal matters. Maggie recognizes the look from her own mirror, the tight control of someone trying to appear calm, while their entire future hangs in the balance of other people's decisions. At 9:15, their case is called, and they enter a courtroom that is smaller and less dramatic than the ones Maggie has seen on television. Judge Patricia Hernandez, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and reading glasses, reviews their motion while David's attorney, a young man in an expensive suit, flips through papers with the hurried efficiency of someone who expected this hearing to be routine. Your Honor, Mr. Peterson begins, my client has discovered significant irregularities in the property division from her 2023 divorce. Bank records show that Mr. Harris used funds from Mrs. Harris' teacher retirement account to capitalize his business, then excluded her from any ownership when they divorced. Additionally, he has been using joint credit accounts to fund substantial personal expenses, including the wedding celebration scheduled for this weekend. The young attorney objects that all property issues were resolved in the original decree. But Judge Hernandez holds up her hand for silence while she examines the bank statements and credit card records that Mr. Peterson has provided. The courtroom is quiet except for the soft whisper of papers being turned and the distant sound of traffic outside. Mr. Cooper, the judge addresses David's attorney, these records show transfers from Mrs. Harris' 403B account directly into Harris Development LLC, followed by substantial personal charges on business credit lines. Was Mrs. Harris represented by independent counsel during the original divorce proceedings? Mr. Cooper shuffles through his files, and Maggie can see him realizing that his quick day in court is becoming more complicated than expected. Your Honor, Mr. Harris handled the divorce amicably. Mrs. Harris agreed to the property division as outlined in the decree. But the decree references separate agreements that aren't in the file, Judge Hernandez observes, her voice carrying the sharp attention of someone who has seen too many financial arrangements that look simple on the surface but hide complicated problems underneath. And these bank records suggest that substantial marital assets were not properly disclosed or divided. She signs an order that Mr. Peterson has prepared, her pen moving across the legal document with the authority of someone whose decisions carry the weight of law. I'm freezing all Harris Development business credit accounts pending a full hearing on the property division. Mr. Harris is prohibited from making any substantial charges or financial commitments until this matter is resolved. The order is specific and immediate. Any attempt by David to use the business credit cards will be declined. Any new loans or lines of credit are suspended. And the bank is required to provide a complete accounting of all account activity since the divorce was finalized. Maggie feels something loosen in her chest as the judge explains that both parties will be notified of a hearing date within 30 days to address the property division issues comprehensively. Outside the courthouse, Mr. Peterson makes copies of the signed order and explains the next steps. This will be served on David personally, probably later today, he says. It will also be sent to the bank immediately, so any charges he tries to make for the wedding expenses will be declined. They drive directly to Lone Star Bank's downtown branch, where the manager, a serious woman named Patricia Vega, reviews the court order and makes notes in David's account file. The restrictions are effective immediately, she explains to Maggie. Since you're listed as co-owner and guarantor, you actually have the authority to monitor account activity. Any charges Mr. Harris attempts will show as declined due to court order. Maggie signs paperwork authorizing the account freeze and providing her contact information for any questions about the restrictions. For the first time in months, she feels like her signature means something protective, rather than just agreeing to let someone else make decisions about her life. On the drive back to San Antonio, Mr. Peterson explains about the process server who will deliver the court order and lawsuit papers to David. We've arranged for Mr. Lewis to be at the wedding reception, he says. Not to disrupt the ceremony, but to serve the papers at an appropriate moment. David needs to understand that the legal process doesn't stop just because he's celebrating. That afternoon, Maggie sits in her kitchen with the court order spread on the table next to the wedding invitation. The contrast is striking: the elegant gold script promising celebration and happiness, next to the official legal document that freezes the accounts David has been using to pay for crystal and champagne and live music. She imagines him at the hotel this evening, probably finalizing details with the wedding planner, ordering extra champagne, telling Kayla to get whatever flowers she wants because money is no object. She imagines his surprise when the credit card is declined, the embarrassment of having to explain to vendors and staff that there has been some kind of banking error. The growing realization that his oldest friend has become something much more complicated than a polite witness to his new happiness. The phone rings, and she recognizes the number from David's office. She lets it go to voicemail, not ready yet for the conversation that is surely coming. When she plays back the message later, his voice is tight with controlled anger. Maggie, what the hell do you think you're doing? Call me back immediately. We need to talk about this ridiculous legal nonsense before you embarrass yourself further. She deletes the message and makes herself a simple dinner, eating at the table while the late afternoon sun slants through her kitchen window. For the first time in months, she feels hungry for something besides soup and crackers, as if the legal action has given her back some kind of appetite for her own life. At 7 o'clock, she takes a shower and lays out the black dress she will wear to the wedding tomorrow night. It is not designer clothing, but it fits well and looks respectable, appropriate for a woman attending an event where she has business to conduct. She packs her small purse with her identification, a copy of the court order, and the invitation that started everything. Before bed, she sits at the kitchen table one more time, reviewing the timeline Mr. Peterson has given her for the legal process. The emergency hearing was just the first step. The real work will happen in the coming weeks, as they build their case for recovering her pension funds and protecting her from David's business debts. But tonight, for the first time since the divorce was finalized, she will sleep knowing that her financial life is no longer entirely at the mercy of someone else's decisions. Outside, San Antonio settles into Friday evening routines, full of people finishing their work weeks and preparing for weekend celebrations. But inside the small house on Maple Street, a retired teacher sits with legal documents and court orders, preparing for a different kind of weekend. Event one where she will finally have something to say about how her story ends, where her presence will mean more than just polite applause for someone else's happiness. And where the real celebration might be the discovery that justice is still possible for people who are brave enough to ask for it. The wedding invitation sits in its folder, no longer an insult but evidence in a case that is finally moving forward. Tomorrow night, David will discover that some guests arrive with more than congratulations. And some celebrations cost more than the people throwing them ever expected to pay. The Riverwalk Imperial Hotel rises from downtown San Antonio like a palace made of light and glass. Its grand entrance glowing with the warm radiance of a place where money transforms into memory. Maggie steps carefully from her rideshare vehicle, gripping the door handle for support as her arthritic knees adjust to the weight of standing upright. After the 20-minute ride from her neighborhood, the valet, a young man in a crisp uniform with gold braiding, offers his arm. With the practiced courtesy of someone trained to treat every guest like visiting royalty. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Riverwalk Imperial." His voice carries the professional warmth of expensive hospitality, and Maggie nods. Her thanks while trying not to calculate how much his tip alone probably costs more than her weekly grocery budget. The lobby stretches before her like a cathedral dedicated to luxury, with crystal chandeliers that throw rainbow patterns across marble floors polished to mirror brightness. The air smells of fresh flowers and expensive cologne, carrying underneath it the subtle scent of money being spent without concern for consequence. Couples in evening wear move through the space with the confident grace of people who belong in places like this. Their laughter mixing with the soft jazz quartet playing near the concierge desk. A digital sign near the grand staircase rotates through elegant script. David and Kayla, a night to remember, followed by photographs of the couple at various romantic locations. Maggie pauses beneath the display, watching images of David feeding wedding cake to Kayla on some tropical beach. Their faces lit with fairy lights and the golden glow of unlimited budgets. In the photographs, David looks younger than his 64 years. His hair perfectly styled, his suits clearly tailored by someone who understands that clothes are an investment in appearance. She recognizes some of the locations from the photos: the rooftop restaurant in Austin, where David once told her they couldn't afford to celebrate their anniversary, the Wine Country Hotel in Fredericksburg that he said was too expensive for people like us. Now she understands that those places weren't too expensive, they were too expensive. For her, for the version of David's life that included a wife who expected shared decisions about shared resources. The ballroom entrance is marked by an arch of white roses and crystal lights that must have cost more than Maggie's car is worth. She shows her invitation to a young woman in a black dress with a clipboard, who checks her name against a guest list, and directs her toward the reception area with a smile that is professionally warm but does not quite reach her eyes. Inside the ballroom, 8 round tables covered in ivory. Linens surround a dance floor that reflects the light from chandeliers hanging like jewelry from the vaulted ceiling. Each table's centerpiece is a tower of white roses and baby's breath arranged around crystal candles that flicker with real flames, not the battery-operated substitutes that most people use for safety and economy. The effect is breathtaking and expensive, a room transformed into the kind of fairy tale setting that exists primarily in magazines and the dreams of people who can afford to make those dreams reality. Maggie finds her assigned seat at a table near the back of the room, placed far enough from the head table to signal her diminished importance in David's new social hierarchy. Her tablemates are mostly older couples she doesn't recognize, probably business associates and their wives, who make polite conversation about grandchildren and vacation plans while they wait for the evening's entertainment to begin. A young waiter approaches their table with a tray of champagne glasses, his name tag reading, Andre Johnson. He moves with the careful efficiency of someone who has learned that expensive events require invisible service. That the goal is to anticipate needs before guests have to ask for anything. When an elderly man at a nearby table jostles his elbow, causing the tray to wobble dangerously, Maggie reaches out to steady it without thinking. "Thank you, ma'am," Andre says gratefully, his smile genuine rather than professional. "Tonight's been crazy. The bride and groom told us money was no object, to give their guests whatever they want. I've never worked an event with this kind of budget." The comment lands in Maggie's chest like a small stone thrown into still water, creating ripples of recognition. She thinks about David's transformation from the man who calculated restaurant tips to the penny to someone who promises unlimited indulgence. And she understands that the distance between those two versions of her ex-husband was built with her retirement savings and credit history. The evening proceeds with the choreographed precision of an event that has been planned down to the minute. David and Kayla make their entrance to applause and camera flashes, both glowing with the particular radiance of people who are getting exactly what they want. Kayla's dress is a confection of silk and lace that moves like liquid light, while David wears a tuxedo that fits him like it was built around his body by someone who understands that perfect clothing is a form of armor against the judgments of others. The dinner service unfolds with theatrical precision, servers appearing and disappearing with perfectly timed courses. Wine glasses that never empty, small orchestrated moments of surprise that demonstrate how much thought and money have been invested in creating this particular memory. Maggie picks at her filet mignon and listens to the conversations around her, stories about business deals and vacation homes and children attending expensive private schools. During the toasts, David stands at the head table with a crystal champagne flute and the confident smile of someone who has finally achieved the life he always believed he deserved. "Friends," he begins, his voice carrying clearly through the wireless microphone system, "Kayla and I wanted to share this evening with the people who matter most to us, to celebrate not just our marriage but the life we're building together." He talks about starting from nothing, about building Harris Development with his own two hands, about the risks and sacrifices that led to his current success. There is no mention of the teacher whose steady salary helped him qualify for his first business loan. No acknowledgement of the wife who signed documents without understanding their implications. No recognition of the pension funds and credit history that provided the foundation for the empire he now claims to have built alone. Kayla takes the microphone with a laugh that sounds like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, her diamond engagement ring catching the light as she gestures. "David always tells me I'm the best investment he ever made," she says to appreciative laughter from the crowd. "Tonight proves he was right, because look at all this." She spreads her arms to encompass the ballroom, the flowers, the champagne. The small army of servers ensuring that every detail exceeds expectations. As the evening progresses toward its financial climax, Kayla tugs at David's sleeve with the excitement of someone about to witness something wonderful. "Baby," she says loud enough for several tables to hear, "it's time to settle up with the hotel. I want everyone to see how much you spent on me tonight." Her voice carries the delighted anticipation of someone who has never had to worry about money and finds the spending of large amounts to be a form of entertainment. A small crowd of guests follows them toward the reception desk. Near the entrance to the ballroom, phones ready to capture the moment when David demonstrates the depth of his devotion through the size of his credit card bill. Maggie remains at her table, watching from a distance while Andre the waiter hovers nearby with an empty tray, his curiosity overcoming his professional discretion. The hotel manager, a distinguished woman in a navy suit, spreads out the evening's charges on the reception desk with the careful precision of someone presenting evidence in court. The total includes the ballroom rental, the dinner service, the premium bar package, the floral arrangements, the photography, the live music, and a dozen smaller luxury touches that add up to more than most people earn in a year. David's smile is confident and relaxed as he reaches into his jacket pocket and withdraws the platinum credit card that bears both his name and Maggie's, though only one of them knew it would be used to fund a celebration of the other's replacement. He slides it across the marble desk with the casual flourish of someone who has never worried about credit limits or account restrictions. The manager swipes the card with practiced efficiency, but instead of the discreet beep of approval, the terminal emits a sharp electronic refusal. She frowns slightly and tries again, slower this time, as if the machine might have misunderstood the first attempt. The second swipe produces the same result, and a small red light begins blinking on the payment terminal. "I'm sorry, sir," the manager says, her professional composure intact despite the growing awkwardness of the situation. "The card is being declined. The system shows the account is restricted by co-owner request." Kayla's champagne smile falters first, confusion replacing delight as she looks from David to the manager to the small crowd of guests, who have suddenly found themselves witnessing something more dramatic than they expected. "What do you mean, restricted?" she asks, her voice rising slightly. "That's his platinum card. He told me it never gets declined." David's confident expression crumbles like a building losing its foundation. His face drains of color before flushing bright red, and he leans across the reception desk with the desperate urgency of someone trying to solve a problem that threatens to destroy his carefully constructed image. "There must be some mistake," he says, his voice tight with controlled panic. "That's my business account. I'm David Harris, Harris Development. There's no restriction. Run it again." The manager attempts the transaction a third time, but the result remains unchanged. She turns the terminal screen toward David, showing the clear message, "Account frozen by co-owner, contact bank for details." The words seem to glow on the small screen, announcing to anyone who can read them that David's financial empire has hidden foundations that are no longer supporting his weight. The crowd of guests begins to murmur among themselves, phones capturing a moment that was supposed to demonstrate unlimited generosity but has instead revealed unexpected limitations. Someone in the back asks quietly, "Who's the co-owner?" while another voice wonders aloud, "Is there a problem with his business?" At that moment, Mr. Lewis, the process server, steps forward from where he has been waiting near the hotel's gift shop. He is unremarkable in his navy suit, the kind of middle-aged man who could blend into any crowd of wedding guests without attracting attention. He approaches David with the calm professionalism of someone who has done this particular job many times before. "David Harris?" he asks politely. David turns toward him with the irritated expression of someone whose evening has already been ruined by unexpected complications. "What?" he snaps. Mr. Lewis extends a manila envelope toward him with both hands, the gesture formal and final. "You've been served. Notice of emergency hearing regarding marital property division and misuse of joint financial accounts." His voice carries clearly in the sudden quiet of the reception area, where conversations have stopped and phone cameras have turned toward the unexpected drama. David stares at the envelope as if it contains something that might bite him, and for several seconds the ballroom lobby is silent except for the distant sound of the jazz quartet still playing dinner music for guests who are no longer paying attention to anything except the scene unfolding near the reception desk. Kayla's voice cuts through the silence with the sharp edge of someone realizing that her fairy tale evening has just become someone else's legal drama. "David," she says, her champagne confidence replaced by growing alarm. "What is he talking about? What marital property? You told me everything was settled with your divorce." David looks around the lobby as if searching for an escape route, his carefully styled hair slightly mussed, his perfect tuxedo suddenly looking like a costume that no longer fits properly. The guests who gathered to witness his generosity now form an audience for his humiliation, their phones still recording their expressions. Shifting from amusement to embarrassment to the particular fascination that people feel when watching someone else's carefully constructed life fall apart in public. And then, from her table near the back of the ballroom, Maggie Harris stands up. She walks toward the reception desk with slow, measured steps. Her low heels clicking on the marble floor with the steady rhythm of someone who has finally found her voice. The crowd parts slightly to let her through, and David's face registers recognition and disbelief in equal measure. "The bank isn't confused, David," she says, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed lobby. "This hotel, these flowers, that ring on Kayla's finger, you built all of it on our retirement money, our home equity, my name on the credit applications. I just finally told the law what you've been doing with my signature." The silence that follows is complete, broken only by the whisper of fabric. As someone in the crowd shifts position and the distant sound of traffic outside on the Riverwalk, David stares at his ex-wife as if seeing her for the first time. While Kayla looks back and forth between them with the growing realization that her wedding celebration has become someone else's moment of truth. The hotel manager clears her throat softly, bringing attention back to the practical matter at hand. "Mr. Harris," she says with professional delicacy, "unless you have an alternative method of payment, we'll need to resolve this situation immediately." And in that moment, in the crystal-lit lobby of the most expensive hotel in San Antonio, surrounded by flowers purchased with someone else's money and guests who came to celebrate someone else's success, David Harris learns that some debts cannot be paid with credit cards, and some celebrations reveal more truth than their hosts intended to share. The evening is far from over, but the party has already ended. The silence in the Riverwalk Imperial's lobby stretches like a held breath, crystalline and fragile in the chandeliered light. Then it breaks all at once, shattering into whispers that spread through the crowd like ripples across still water. "Is that his ex-wife?" someone hisses near the floral arrangements. Did she freeze his credit card? Another voice asks with barely concealed delight. Kayla whirls on David with the fury of someone whose fairy tale has just revealed itself to be someone else's nightmare. Her silk dress seems to lose some of its luster under the harsh reality of declined credit and legal documents. You told me everything was yours. She snaps, her voice no longer the musical laugh that charmed dinner guests but something sharp and accusatory. You said your ex walked away happy with her teacher's pension. You said there were no complications. David sputters words that sound like excuses even before they form complete sentences. This is just paperwork confusion, he says, his voice rising with desperation. Some banking error, some misunderstanding about the accounts. Maggie, you can't be serious about this legal nonsense. We settled everything months ago. But Maggie steps closer to the reception desk, not rushing, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Each click of her low heels on the marble floor sounds like punctuation in a sentence she has been waiting 35 years to finish. The crowd of wedding guests shifts to accommodate her passage, their phones still recording, their expressions. Ranging from embarrassment to fascination to the particular satisfaction that comes from watching someone receive their comeuppance in public. David, she says, her voice steady and clear in the hushed lobby, the bank knows exactly what's happening. This celebration, this hotel, that diamond ring you bought for. Kayla, you built all of it on our shared credit history, my retirement contributions, my signature on business documents I never fully understood. She pauses, looking around at the assembled guests with the confidence of someone who has finally found solid ground beneath her feet. I'm not confused anymore. The court order is quite specific. The hotel manager, Patricia Vega, maintains her professional composure despite the unprecedented situation unfolding at her reception desk. Mr. Harris, she says with careful diplomacy, we'll need to arrange alternative payment immediately. Or I'll have to contact hotel security to mediate the situation. Her tone suggests this is not the first time she has dealt with financial complications during expensive events. But perhaps the first time the complications have involved legal documents served during the payment process. David looks around the lobby with the wild expression of someone whose escape routes have all been blocked. His college friends from the Rotary Club suddenly discover urgent conversations about golf and business. Their wives examining their phones with the absorbed attention of people who have decided not to witness whatever happens next. The photographer hired to capture magical moments quietly packs his equipment, understanding that these particular moments are not the kind anyone will want to remember. This is ridiculous, David says, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure of maintaining dignity in an impossible situation. Maggie, you're embarrassing yourself. These people don't need to see you acting like some vindictive ex-wife over money that was spent years ago. But his words carry the hollow ring of someone who knows the game is over. That the careful construction of his new identity is crumbling in real time under the weight of documentation and legal reality. Maggie opens her small purse and withdraws the folded court order, holding it with the same careful attention she once gave to lesson plans and gradebooks. I'm not acting vindictive, David. I'm acting informed. She hands the document to the hotel manager, who unfolds it and reads the official language with the practiced eye of someone who understands contracts and legal obligations. The court has frozen all Harris development credit accounts pending a hearing about property division and the misuse of marital assets. Kayla's face cycles through emotions like a slideshow of disappointment, confusion, anger, embarrassment, and finally a calculating hardness that suggests she is rapidly reassessing her investment in a man whose financial empire has just revealed itself to be built on quicksand. David, she says, her voice taking on a dangerous edge, you better figure this out right now, or I swear to God, this marriage is over before it starts. The threat hangs in the air among the crystal and roses, and David's face goes through its own transformation, from red-faced bluster to pale realization. He understands, perhaps for the first time, that his new life is balanced on foundations that were never as solid as he pretended, that the retirement he stole and the credit he misused were not infinite resources but borrowed time that has just run out. In the weeks that follow, the full hearing proceeds exactly as Mr. Peterson predicted. The bank records, retirement account transfers, and the frozen credit card incident paint a clear picture for Judge Hernandez. Who has seen enough financial manipulation in divorce cases to recognize a pattern when presented with compelling evidence? David's attorney argues about procedural technicalities and the passage of time, but the documentation speaks louder than legal maneuvering. The judge's ruling is comprehensive and specific, a redivision of marital property that acknowledges Maggie's contributions to Harris development. Compensation for the misused retirement funds that reflects both the principal amount and the investment growth she missed, and relief from liability for the business. Credit accounts that David used for personal expenses. The court finds, Judge Hernandez states in her written opinion, that the original divorce decree failed to properly identify and divide substantial marital assets, resulting in significant financial harm to Mrs. Harris. Maggie doesn't celebrate when Mr. Peterson calls to tell her that David had to sell his downtown condo and 2 rental properties to satisfy the court's compensation order. She doesn't comment when her neighbor shows her a social media post from Kayla complaining about crazy ex-wives who can't let go, and announcing her decision to focus on herself, rather than cleaning up other people's financial messes. Maggie simply thanks Mr. Peterson for his work, writes him a check from her restored retirement account, and turns off her phone to enjoy the quiet of her kitchen without interruption. 6 months later, she sits in the fellowship hall of First Baptist Church, leading a monthly workshop she started called Understanding Your Money. The folding tables are filled with women like herself, widows, divorcees, and wives who want to understand their financial lives rather than simply trusting someone else to manage them. She teaches them how to read credit card statements, understand pension documents, and recognize when someone is using their signature to benefit themselves rather than the partnership. The most important thing, she tells her students, pointing to a sample credit card agreement projected on the church's old television screen, is that your signature means something. It's not just politeness or trust. It's a legal commitment, and you have the right to understand exactly what you're committing to before you sign anything. Her own small house has been transformed by the settlement money, though she has spent it carefully and thoughtfully. The roof leak is finally repaired, the kitchen has new appliances that don't wheeze or rattle, and the backyard features a small vegetable garden where she grows tomatoes and herbs that she shares with neighbors who remember her kindness during their own difficult times. She still drives the same modest car and shops with coupons, but now those choices feel like preferences rather than necessities. On a warm spring afternoon, she sits on her front porch with Loretta, watching children from the neighborhood play in the small park across the street. The Harris development billboard that used to loom over the intersection has been replaced by an advertisement for hearing aids, and Maggie finds the change oddly satisfying, not because David's business suffered, but because the landscape of her daily life no longer includes reminders of her former naivety. You ever think about what would have happened if you'd just stayed home that night? Loretta asks, sipping iced tea from glasses that no longer have to be washed in shifts because the dishwasher works properly. Maggie considers the question while watching a young mother push her daughter on the park swings. Both of them laughing with the unself-conscious joy of people who trust that tomorrow will bring more opportunities for happiness. No, she says finally, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who has learned to speak up for herself. For the first time in a long time, when I sign my name on something, a check, a legal document, even a birthday card, it feels like it actually belongs to me. A gentle breeze lifts the edge of the wedding invitation that she keeps tucked in her Bible as a bookmark, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as evidence of what happens when people underestimate the power of a woman who decides to read the fine print of her own life. The invitation has become a teaching tool in her financial literacy classes. An example of how expensive celebrations can reveal the true cost of relationships built on unequal access to information and resources. As the afternoon settles into evening, with the neighborhood growing quiet and the streetlights beginning to flicker on, Maggie waters her garden and thinks about the students who will attend next week's workshop. Some are dealing with financial abuse, others with the complexities of widowhood. And a few are simply women who want to understand their money before they need to protect it. All of them remind her that financial independence is not just about numbers in bank accounts, but about the confidence that comes from understanding exactly where you stand. She has learned that signatures have power, that trust without transparency is just another word for vulnerability, and that sometimes the most important education happens not in classrooms but in courtrooms, bank offices, and hotel lobbies where people's true priorities are revealed under pressure. Her story could have ended with soup for dinner and medical bills she couldn't afford to pay, but instead it has become a beginning not of bitterness or revenge, but of the particular kind of wisdom that comes from surviving someone else's betrayal and choosing to help others avoid the same mistake. Life, she thinks as she turns off the porch light and prepares for bed, doesn't end just because it breaks once. What falls apart can be the very place where people learn to stand again, stronger and smarter than they were before the ground shifted beneath their feet. If her story gave even a small moment of strength to someone out there, then everything she went through means something today. Her experience, the confusion, the legal battle, the moment of standing up for herself in that crystal-lit hotel lobby might become the seed of courage for another person who discovers that their signature has been used to build someone else's dreams while their own security crumbles. If this resonated with anyone listening, she hopes they will remember that it's never too late to ask questions about documents they've signed. Never too late to demand transparency in financial partnerships, and never too late to discover that their voice matters more than their politeness. Every story of standing up creates permission for someone else to do the same. Thank you, she thinks as she settles into her comfortable bed in her secure house, for the reminder that some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. And that the most important lessons often come not from what people teach us intentionally, but from what we learn when we finally decide to read our own contracts